An oldie but a goodie.
Right.
The song today. The reason that I chose that song is that the topic for this week is about creating in this day. When the theme for this month is about the intersection of divinity and humanity, each of us is called to be a place of infinite creativity. Now that sounds great. What a great sales pitch. What a great slogan. The thing though is, how do we do it moment by moment by moment? One of the illustrations that the person who shared information about today's talk is, I have a check here. Now you can all see that the check is way outdated. The date on the check goes back to May 16th, 2017. Were I to take this to the bank today, what would the bank do? The bank would laugh at me and say, "That's cute. It's a nice idea." And it's also for $1.25. So I think that their laughter might even increase some more. The whole notion, though, is that oftentimes we live our lives from moments just like this. We let our outdated, postmarked, post-dated checks be what guides us. Perhaps I'll take that back. I know that I've done that. To put that on other people and suspect that you may engage in the same kinds of inappropriate practices that I do is inappropriate, and I'm not trying to condemn or say that you aren't living appropriately. But I am acknowledging that there are times that I just will not stick with the moment, and I will get all caught up in old stories. I will spend a lot of time and energy thinking about things that have impacted me, and I let them continue to impact me. There are habits that I have acquired that are not necessarily moving me forward in a way that is whole, complete, and vital. And again, I just say this, sometimes if somebody can own that, it can be a little bit easier for saying, oh yeah, it's kind of like him. Kind of like what he said happens for him, rather than pointing at each other. One of the things about the teachings of Ernest Holmes, one of the things about religious science teachings is they can be very challenging. Because one of the things that Ernest Holmes proposed, he's the founder of this movement that this church, that this center roots itself in, is the idea that what we think creates what lives in our world. Now how crappy is that when things are miserable in our world? It can create quite a sense of conflict. And for people who become well versed in this teaching, it can even become a point of persecution. There used to be an expression, well, what was in your consciousness that let that happen? The whole notion that, well, something must have been going on in you for that to be out picturing the way it does. And I found that very irritating, because I found that I may come into situations where I haven't even thought anything. I'm just coming into the situation, and it's going on full blown. And the teaching has been, well, somehow you were drawn to that because that's your energy, because that's your vibration. Now, I could stick with that simplistic arrow pointing back at myself, saying, well, what did I do that caused it? And in some ways, it's a little bit unhelpful. It's the same kind of practice, and I say this with a direction towards Tayan. Tayan is a psychotherapist, so she works with people. And having spent years and years and years in psychotherapy, I could spend years and years and years looking at my story thinking, what is it that led me to these points? What is it that led me to these decisions? The problem is that it's really gazing on my navel ad nauseum. This entertainment of these past things, these entertainments of the past, does not necessarily prove or advance me from where I am. These kinds of reflections, they can be powerful, they can be useful, but they can also be ropes that hold us on to an old story that no longer serves us. Or again, I'll correct the pronoun. They'll hold me onto an old story that's no longer helpful for me to tell. And though, looking at those stories can give us a huge insight to what's going on. One of the stories that I used to commonly tell, and when I first started telling it, it was really to generate a kind of sense of laughter. It was that for years and years, I would get a tape recorder for my birthday. But then my sister would get that same tape recorder for Christmas. And then I would get the tape recorder again for my next birthday. And she would get the tape recorder again for the next Christmas. And then we had another thing that was reciprocally given over and over again, and it was a typewriter. For one of the holidays, my sister would get the typewriter, and then I would get the typewriter, then she would get the typewriter. Actually, neither one of us ever had it. And at the time that I was telling it, I thought it was kind of funny. But in retrospect, I realized that I was telling a time when my family had been in the midst of bankruptcy. The sheriff came to the door and was carrying stuff out of the house, you know, with the little warrant that says, you know, these things are no longer yours because we're going to sell them at auction and they won't be yours anymore. What I realized from telling that story over and over again is I was dealing with the pain of having gone through the kind of poverty. The way that we managed it was my grandmother, fortunately, had bought many of the pieces of furniture that were in the house. And my grandmother was a compulsive saver, so I get some of my characteristics from Grandma. My grandma was a compulsive saver, and she could say, wait, look, I have the receipt for that very chair that you are carrying out of the house. This is my receipt. You see that it's my name on it. It doesn't belong. It is not my daughter's. My daughter is using it. And I can't tell you what my son-in-law is doing with it, but it is my chair, so you put that right back here. One of the things about telling that story, I meant it to be funny. I meant it to show that my family was pretty creative, the fact that they could get away with it for many years. And my sister was the one that broke through because finally she just bought herself her own tape recorder. She wasn't going to be stuck with it anymore. The way I dealt with it is I imagined I was going to be a priest and I was going to live a life of poverty. Because that's what I had been raised to do, and I thought it was great. I had learned this from my family. I had capitalized on how to live your most without anything. And in retelling the story years later, I came to realize that it was my way of coping with a situation where things felt powerless. So sometimes those stories that we retell can give us insights to ourselves. The question is, can we use the insight to move forward and to make change? Or do we use the story as a way to say, that's just the way I'm going to be? That's the only way that's possible to me. So the first thing that I'm going to invite as we consider the past, the present, and the future, as we consider the divine in this moment, here and now, is, can we take the time to look at the stories that we tell about ourselves? Can we look at the history that we recount? Can we look at how we identify our pasts? And the pasts may go back to before we were born, or it may go back to being at Safeway over the week and an encounter with somebody there. The nature of the stories that we tell is unimportant, but what is important is how do we use those stories and hold them up as mirrors to look at what is the message that we are telling about ourselves. That story that I told myself let me say that I could get by, I could get away with poverty. I could get away with being powerless. It's much easier to say that God has all the power and that I have none. And when I start to recognize that story, then I can decide, do I really want that to be my story? Do I really want my story to be that I am a powerless being? I am a being who has $1.25 that I was able to deposit in a bank account someday. Now, the person who also wrote the story talked about the present like this. If I pull this out right now, this can be acted upon. This can be used right here, right now. Well, not exactly right here. I mean, yes, I could put it in the collection. And the collection, we could go from here and deposit it in the thing. This is where we are right now in some regards. Think of this as a metaphor. This is the metaphor for how we can move through our lives. What is the currency, what is the power that we have available to us right now? So to what extent can we use our stories, can we use our past, can we use our connections with other people as the currency? The person who, Sunshine Day, who gave ideas about the talk, the idea of currency is the idea of money, but currency is also what's flowing in the walls to give us the electrical lights. What is it that empowers us? I think most people drove here. There was a currency in that vehicle. There is a currency that is always at work. How do we become aware of that? So, phase one, step one of today, and the idea to take away with is, what are our stories? What are we telling ourselves? Do we use it as a source of power, of currency, or do we use it as a way to hold on to old stories that no longer serve us? Just pay attention to it. As we start to pay attention to our stories, as we start to pay attention to how we are in the moment where we are, we get to make choices. Rather than criticizing ourselves, it becomes a choice of opening, of possibility. Step out of judgment of those stories. Just pay attention to them. In that paying attention, more becomes available. Second point that I want to share about is the idea that we have this moment right here, right now. Each one of us has chosen, for some reason, to be right here, right now. How often do we pay attention to the primacy of the very moment that we're in? It's very easy for us to get caught up on, well, our list of things to do. What is it that is pulling us? What is it that's calling us? What is it that is moving us along? In Khalil Gibran's reading, there's the talk of being on the bank of the river of time, watching it go by. How often, as we're on that bank, are we coming up with ideas about what's going to happen? How do we simply take the moment and let it steep us? Tana and I both drink tea. I don't know if other people have tea. But you have to steep the tea in the water. Even coffee, you don't just dip coffee into the water and you suddenly have coffee. It's brewed. How do we let ourselves brew in this moment? How do we seek all of the flavor, all of the experience that's in it? So often we are so fixated on what's happening in the future, or so fixated on what's happening in the past, that it's very difficult to just savor the flavor of this moment right here, right now. Some years ago, my husband Mykal really wanted a lilac bush. Now I'm going to share it. Now, there's no requirement. There's no requirement, so if you're allergic to lilac, you do not need to engage in it. So, the lilac is blooming right here, right now. They say to stop and smell the roses. They say it for a reason. The whole notion, that expression, it's about enjoying what actually is around us. I think about your mom in the hospital. Whatever is going on with her brain, you still have her loving hand that you can hold, that you can convey, and that you can share immense love in just that holding of the hand. I say that, I remember when my grandmother, the one who had the receipts, she had her second or third stroke. And she was in the hospital, and this was a woman who was extremely active. She retired at 65 from doing industrial medicine. And really, industrial medicine in those days, people would come in out of the factory, and they would have cut off a limb or something. And she would be the one that would fix them. She delivered a baby while she was doing her industrial medicine work. You know, one of the people in the factory was pregnant, went into labor, and my grandmother was the one that delivered the baby. So she retires from the factory at 65. You know what? She turns around, she changes her birth certificate, she goes back to another place and gets rehired as a 55-year-old woman and works another 10 years at the next place until she's 65. Now she's 75, but they think she's 65. So she's having her second retirement party. So the second retirement party, wait, there's more. She wasn't finished. She's 75, has her second retirement party. She's now home. She's watching my sister and I. She's taking care. She's got the furniture all kept. Nobody's carried it out because she's told the sheriff, get your paws off of that. She goes back to work now, and she doesn't fix her birth certificate again. She just goes to a nursing home, and she's like, I know you need a nurse to help with those old people. My grandmother, who is 75 at this point in time, is going to the nursing home to help those old people. I mean, what my grandmother really taught me is be in the moment. She made this huge commitment that she was going to be giving care, moment by moment by moment. She chose to be a nurse as at the age of 20. To be a nurse back when she was doing it in 1918, it was not something that was common practice. She had to go to a convent to start it off. She met my grandfather and they fell in love, but she still went on and became a nurse. She still did it. So when my grandmother had a stroke and was unable to move or was unable to, she was just in a bed, it was simply holding her hand. It was simply just being with her because she was alive for some reason. There was a presence about her that even when she was there in the hospital, she was a place through which other people could bring and deliver care. How she was in the world, oftentimes we think, I have to be a certain way. Again, I use the we. I often think that there must be a certain way that I am in order for me to be worthy, in order for me to be worthwhile. There's got to be a way that I'm contributing, that I have to be an active agent in the world. My invitation for being in the present is, what if it's just about being? Sometimes that being may be incredibly active. Again, my grandmother is a great role model for me of someone who could face adversity. You know, the 65-year-old woman goes back and she pretends she's 55, and then she goes back another time. She's someone who kept doing things over and over again. But she didn't just let her heart stop. her heart continued to beat when she was in that bed in a care facility because there was something more that she had to deliver. What if we give ourselves the spaciousness to just deliver whatever it is that we have, rather than hold ourselves to a set of expectations? I've got to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know about you, but I do know about me that I set all kinds of expectations for myself. And I also set up these expectations, and sometimes I don't meet them. And when I don't meet them, I'm not always that gentle on myself. Can we simply give ourselves the space to be whatever it is that we can be in the moment we are? Now, I'm going to have one more song to touch on that connection between this moment and what to do with this moment. And Mykal is working his magic with the technology that is available to bring that forward. So this song is from the show Annie, which
tomorrow, bet your bottom dollar.
Go ahead.
Tomorrow, there'll be sun. Oh, just thinking about tomorrow. Clears away the cobwebs and the sorrow. Till there's time when I'm stuck with a day that's gray and lonely. I stick out my chin and grin and say, oh, the sun will come out tomorrow. So you gotta hang on till tomorrow. Come what may, tomorrow. You're always a day away. Yes, you are. Okay, the sun will come out tomorrow, so you gotta hang on till tomorrow. There'll be sun. I'm just thinking about tomorrow. Please wake the cobwebs and the sorrow. Till then, I'm stuck with the day that's gray and lonely. I just stick out my chin and grin. Sun will come out tomorrow, so you gotta hang on till tomorrow. Come what may, it's our not life for us. Instead of treating, we get tricked. Instead of kisses, we get kicked. It's our not life for us. It's harder. We get tricked. Instead of kisses, we get kicked.
that was a Motown interpretation of that piece from the Broadway show. I could send out the link. I didn't.
Okay.
The reason that I was sharing that song is the final point is that, as I said, we are all in the act of creation. And in my mind, when I think back, that song came out when I was 9 or 10. It was right after my parents had gone through the bankruptcy experience. And it was my real first exposure to the whole ideas of science of mind teaching. In the song, it's like, what was she focusing on? She wasn't focusing on the hard knock life that she was living. She wasn't focusing on having nothing. Being an abandoned child during the Depression. She was focusing on the possibilities of a greater tomorrow. The invitation is, are we willing to put our attention to a positive, powerful moment? In Science of Mind teachings, Ernest Holmes proposed the radical idea that there is a power, a currency, that imbues all of creation. And that it is as available as our breath. And that it is not something that we have to beg to or plead to. It is something that resides within our very core. And just like electrical power, we just have to turn ourselves on to what is always available. If I were to shut out the lights would go away, but that doesn't mean that the power stopped being available. It's just, how have we accessed it? In the song, thinking about tomorrow, that little girl, little orphan Annie, put her attention on something that was completely different. Rather than on saying, you know, I'm stuck in the shadows. She acknowledges that they're there. Which can be one of the things that can get irritating about this faith tradition. It's like, oh, it's all good, it's all happy, it's all great. Do you ever find that it's really irritating? Life is not great, or you have experiences where life is not good, but people are like, you'll see through it, it's really okay. It doesn't feel like that. That feels like a complete insult. It feels like you're not listening to me. I just told you this terrible, horrible thing, and you're telling me, it's all fine, it'll be good. God's going to make good use of that. You can trust that. That can feel like a violation. That we are where we are. And I honestly don't believe that there is a divine plan, that the divine said, I am going to put you right here, and this is the means through which all greatness will flow. We are all interconnected with a huge world. We are in a world that has made its fair share of miserable, horrible actions and mistakes. Western Europe is well known for the efforts of colonization. And colonization were not a particularly respectful, oh, I see that you have this lovely land, and we are endeared by everything that you are doing in your lovely land, and we respect it, and we want to lift it up higher. No, it was like, you are savages, and we're going to show you the right way, which happens to be my way. And you're going to follow my way. And if you don't follow my way, then I'm going to treat you way worse than you savages treated each other. We live in a context where that was a guiding principle. I, as a white man, had particular benefits afforded to me by no virtue of my own behavior, by no virtue of my own qualities, apart from the fact that I was born male and that I was born Caucasian. There were certain things that were available to me that were not available to others. That was through no bit of my own consciousness that brought me forward. It's completely by cultural circumstances. And one of the things about religious science is it hasn't always taken into account those cultural factors. But I think in bringing this teaching forward, it's acknowledging what they have. And how do I bring it forward in a way that becomes conscious of that? How do I use my privileges? How do I use the advantages that were afforded me so that I push through? Last week, as a couple people mentioned, I wasn't here. I was at a conference for the Washington Education Association. And it was an opportunity to be doing the business of that organization. It was an opportunity to look at 69 business items, to look at 13 resolutions. It was an opportunity to meet from Thursday 6 p.m. until 10 p.m., Friday from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m., Saturday from 7 a.m. until 2:30 Sunday morning. Although I bagged out at 10:05 because I just knew that, you know, my little head was going to explode if I had any much more. But it was an opportunity to establish the business of that organization. It was an opportunity where, for example, there are a bunch of education associations across the United States that are saying educators should be paid better. Educators and police people and fire defenders should be paid better. So West Virginia went on a statewide strike. Oklahoma, Colorado. One of the decisions was, should we support that? Now, I mean, I know that that sounds kind of ridiculous. Well, yeah, of course we should support it. But it's something to decide as a matter of business, as a matter of orientation. So as we go forward, I tell that story because how do we go about our lives making conscious choices? Rather than just saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. How do we choose? And if we find ourselves sometimes making unconscious choices, to be able to not say, oh, look at me, I made that terrible mistake. I unconsciously engaged in that. To catch ourselves and to say, how do I push towards tomorrow to see a better day? So even if the sun is shining, it's that there was a sun inside. I mean, the whole point of Little Orphan Annie was that she was this ray of sunshine herself. It wasn't that her presence created a weather that changed. But it's how do we become our own force of climate? How do we each become our own powerful presence for good? For more divine right action in the world. Each one of us has that opportunity. How it shows up is a myriad of ways. Just like I talked about, being able to hold your mom's hand is an act of profound, deep love. We may simply touch another person on the shoulder. We may make eye contact. One of the things that we got to do on one of the days is there were a bunch of students from Spokane. Spokane was a place where there was a school shooting. And the Spokane students organized all of the union people who came forward for a rally for advancing the notion of let's be sensible about gun control. Why don't we put as much attention on the safety and well-being of students and educators in schools and families who attend those schools? Why don't we put as much attention on that as on the freedom to carry AK-47s? Is that the right gun name? AK-15, yeah. AK. Okay, auto rifles that do things. That what if we were to put as much attention on that as on the right to bear the arms? And it isn't about withholding rights from anybody. It's about advancing the rights of safety, advancing the rights of well-being. This was by students. The one girl, she was 13 years old. She said, I joined because I really wasn't involved in anything, and then I didn't realize what a big thing it would be. She was from her community, and one of the reasons that this was so vibrant to these students, that they connected with the Parkland students, was they lost students in their own community. And they, in retrospect, they looked back and said, what if we had been as courageous as the students in Parkland? What if we had stood up then? Might our actions then have done something to change Parkland? But rather than wringing their hands and saying, well, if we had done that, they just decided, though, they didn't do that. But going forward, this group of 6 high school girls were behind a march of 30,000 people in Spokane, Washington.
Wow. Wow, in Spokane.
In Spokane, Washington. 30,000 people gathered. Now, I would say part of it is the fact that they were like, oh, yeah, we had a shooting in our own schools. We had students who are no longer alive. So there was a relevance in the community. And at the same time, though, when there is all of this saying, you are too young, you don't understand. You're being advanced, you're being politicized for a purpose that you don't understand. That 13-year-old girl, she was like, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm speaking to the 500 educators that are gathered here. And I spoke to the 30,000 people that were gathered in Spokane because I do understand what's going on. Again, I use this illustration to show the breadth that we can operate from. That it can be as intimate as touching someone's hand to as huge as being a 13-year-old and speaking out. None of us are 13, I don't think. None of us are 13, but all of us have a capacity for power and for presence, for moving forward into tomorrow with a vision. So hold that vision. Hold on to it, let it take shape, let it take form. And moment by moment, let it come forward. And so it is.